Welcome to Static Routing Demo, IPv4 Default Static Route. So this is the third video demo on static routing. This would be our topology to be considered on this video demo. Let's move on to the demo. Okay, so this would be our topology for this video demo. And let us identify first the networks and the IP addresses to be considered on this video demo. Now, this topology comprises of 3 router configurations. So you've got R1 here, R2, and R3. Okay, so first we are going to identify the networks connected to R1, and these are 172.16.3.0, 172.16.2.0. Okay, that is for R2, we've got 1.0, 2.0, and 192.168.1.0 here /24. Now for R3, we have this 192.168.1.0 and 2.0/24 directly connected to it. All right. So even though this topology is used for IPv6 also, so we have a dual stack configuration. And this, we are going to start with an IPv4 IP assignment on this topology. Okay. So we have not yet configured any, all right, so on these routers here. So let's start with IPv4 assignment. So let's start with PC1. Okay. So we will be assigning the second usable IP on PC1. So we could go to desktop and IP configuration here. So let us assign an IP address. So this one would be 172.16. All right. So .3.2. So subnet mask would be /24. So that would be 255.255.255.0. So our default gateway from the topology is the first usable IP. So this would be 172.16.3.1. All right, so that would be our default gateway. Okay, close. So for PC2, we could go ahead and configure it also. IP configuration for PC2 would be 172.16.1.2. Okay, so as shown on the topology. So our subnet mask is /24, so that would be 255.255.255.0. So the default gateway here would be .1. First usable IP is assigned to our default gateway. So this would be 172.16.1.1 here. All right. Next, so for PC3, let us assign an IPv4 address to this. So that would be on IP configuration here. Okay, so this would be 192.168.2.2. Okay, subnet mask is /24. Okay, and the default gateway is the first usable IP, which is 192.168.2.1 here. All right, so this would be 2.1. All right, so we're done with the IP assignment on these 3 pieces here. Now let's move on to the router. So let's start with R1. Okay, so let us configure our R1. Okay, so let's give it a name. So enable configure terminal. Okay, say this is host name R1. Right. Now let us assign an IP address on these interfaces. So let's show the interfaces here. All right. Let's go back to R1. So let's start with the G000. So interface G0/0/0 here. IP address. Okay. So this would be 172.16.3.1. All right. So 255.255.255.0. Okay, and then no shutdown. Right.
So the next thing here is to configure serial 010. So let's do it. So interface serial 010. All right, so IP address, that would be 172.16, okay, .2.1, right? So based on our topology. And this is 255.255.255.0, which is this last 24. Okay, and then no shutdown. Okay, so we're done with R1. So also during the configuration, so observe that we have here our indicator. So if it is green, that means it is connected. Okay, so for the serial 010 of R1, it's still in red because we have not yet configured. So the other end, which is on serial 010 here. So let us now configure R2 for IPv4 assignment. So let us display the interfaces here. So this is also serial 0/0/0. And this one here is serial 011. So let's configure R2 now. All right. So enable, configure terminal. Okay, so let's give it a name. Host name R2. Okay, so for R2, let's start the configuration with the Ethernet. So that would be interface G0/0/0 there. All right, so IP address, this would be 172.16.1.1. All right, so 255.255.255.0. Okay, no shutdown. All right, so next would be interface serial 0/1/0 there. Okay, so this is what we're going to configure. Let's put an IP address on it. So IP address 172.16.2.2. Right? So 255.255.255.0. Okay, and then no shutdown. So if you will observe, this is now green. So that means these two here are physically connected. All right. So let's configure serial 011 here. Okay. So let's move it on the other side here so that we can see the IP address. So that would be interface serial 0/1/1. All right. So IP address 192.168.1.2. 255.255.255.0. All right, so no shutdown. So we're done already with all the IP assignments or IPv4 assignments on R2. Let's go ahead and configure on R3. Okay, so CLI, let's configure this. So enable, configure terminal. Let's have host name. All right, this is R3 here. Okay, and let's do the IP assignment. Let us display the interfaces here. Okay, and configure R3 now. So you've got interface G0/0/0. IP address. So this would be 192.168.2.1. All right. So 255.255.255.0. No shutdown. Okay. So we're done with the R3 LAN here. Next would be serial 011. Okay, so interface serial 0/1/1 here. So IP address, this would be 192.168.1.1. All right, so 1.1 255.255.255.0. All right, and then no shutdown. Okay, so it is now up. Okay, so all of our interfaces are green. Okay, just to make sure before we test it, you could click this, okay, fast forward time, so that it synchronizes faster.
All right, so let's test our connectivity here. So we can use this add PDU here to test the connectivity and check the status on this area here. Okay, now let me click add simple PDU from PC1 to R1 since this is directly connected. So we have successful here. Also, from router 1 to router 2, which is directly connected also. And then from router 2 to the computer, okay, so successful. All right, so we just need to test the directly connected networks if they are really connected. Okay, so next would be from router 2 to router 3. So these are directly connected. And then from router 3 going to PC3. Okay, so successful. All right, so you just have to click this for this topology to fully synchronized. All right, so now that we are done with an IP assignment, we can now proceed with static routing. All right, so now that we're done with the IPv4 assignment among these devices, so we are now going to configure default static route. Okay, so from R1, so going to R2, and also we are going to consider configuring default static route from R3 going to R2. So basically, static route is commonly used on the routers. Okay, so that is considered to be a stub router. So it is usually considered on stub network. So basically, on this demonstration, so we are going to consider R2 here, for instance, as our ISP. Okay, so though ISP uses the public IP address, now for the sake of demo, so we are going to consider this as our ISP. And R1 and R3 here are stub network. All right, so let me denote, okay, a boundary here. Okay, so let me do some boundary color coding. Okay, so fill. Right, so let's just use that fill color. So for instance, this network here, okay, definitely this is one subnet. Okay, and we are going to consider R1 to be our stub router. All right, so when we say stub router, there is no other way to get in and out of this network 172.16.3.0 but via R1. All right, so same thing. Let me set another color. All right, so for this network here. Okay, all right, so let's say this is my second network here. All right, so let me close this. All right, and let me move this on here. Okay, so assuming, okay, so with our assumption here that the blue network and the green network would be our stub network. Okay, and R3 and R1 here are the stub routers. So basically, we are configuring the default static route on the stub router. Okay, so let's do it. So right now, we don't have any other configuration on R1, R2, and R3. So to check that out, so let's go to R1 and type in here. Okay, so enable show IP route. All right, so enter. So what you can see here is just the directly connected networks. Now let's do the same on R2. Okay, so you'll have here. So enable show IP. What's that? So Control Shift 6 to terminate. All right. So enable show IP route. So again, what we have here are just directly connected networks on R2. And on R3, which is a stub router on our setup. Okay, so enable, okay, show IP route. All right, so again, we have here directly connected networks. Okay, and if we're going to ping, okay, PC1 to PC2, so it's a failure. PC3 to PC2 failed. PC1 to PC3 is failed. So definitely there is no configuration or routing configuration set on this topology. Now let's go on with our first objective or second objective here. So which is to configure default static route from R1 to R2. So the syntax for the IPv4 default static route would be IP route 0.0.0.0 or 0.0.0.0. You've got quad 0 there, all right? And then IP address, which is the next hop IP or the exit interface, all right? So let me do my configuration on R1. So on R1, okay, so let me configure my default static route here. So to configure, configure terminal, you've got IP route 0.0.0.0 0.0.0.0. Okay, so let me use the exit interface here instead. So which is, all right, serial 010. So I have here serial 010. All right. Now, when I have do show IP route, okay, we have here S asterisk, which denotes that this is a default static route here. So any packets destined to any destination, okay, so not within this network, okay, listed on the routing table will be forwarded to serial 010. That's the purpose of default route. If none is found, okay, or no match is found on the routing table, all packets will be forwarded to serial 010, and that would be directed to R2. So that is the purpose of the default route here. Okay. Also, let us configure default route on R3 going to R2. All right. So let's do it. Again, we don't have static here. Okay, so let me place it on the side so that we can see the network address. Okay, so as you can see here, we only have the directly connected networks, and any packets, okay, so not found, all right, or any packets whose destination is not found in the routing table will be forwarded to R2 there. All right, so let's configure here. So configure terminal, all right, so IP route, you've got 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0, okay, and let's use the exit interface, which is serial 011. All right, so I've got serial 0/1/1. Enter. So let's see the routing table. So we are expecting default route here. So do show IP route. Right, so as you can see here, we have a default route going to serial 011, which is directed to R2. So any packet destined to any network not listed on this routing table will be forwarded also to serial 011. All right, so let's close this. Okay, so the next thing to do is to configure, okay, standard static route from R2 going to R1 and R3 respectively. So we have to apply our standard static route configuration. Okay, so I'm on R2, and you can see here only the directly connected networks. So we are going to configure a static route. All right, so that would be configure terminal. So you've got IP route. All right, so 172.16.3.0, 255.255.255.0. Okay, so let me use my next hop IP address here, which is 172.16.2.1. All right, so also we need to set the standard static route going to 192.168.2.0 here. So let's do it. So IP route 192.168.2.0. 2.0 there. 255, the 255, the 255.0. All right, and then our next hop IP address, which is 192.168. All right, so that would be 1.1. So it's this one here. All right, so enter. Now let's see the routing table. You've got here show. We're inside the config, so do show IP route. Right? So we have now static going to 3.0 and 2.0. So now that we're done with the configuration, so let's check if we can now ping PC1 going to PC2. So take note that the destination packet would be 172.16.1.0, and that is not listed on R1's routing table. Okay, so we don't have here 172.16.1.0. So because we have here the static default route or the default static route, any packet not listed on the routing table will be forwarded to serial 010. And that's what we're expecting. So when we ping from PC1 to PC2, it will be forwarded to R2. And when we double click this one, so it's successful. All right, so same thing, PC3 to PC2. So again, on router 3, okay, so displaying the routing table, we don't have here network 172.16.1.0, so which is the destination here for PC2. Okay, so since we have configured a default route, any destination, okay, not on the routing table will be forwarded to serial 011 here. So in that case, when we ping PC1 or PC3 going to PC2, it will be forwarded to R2. And when we click on this one, so it is successful. All right, so same thing with PC1 pinging PC3. Since the destination 192.168.2.0 is not found on the routing table, it will be forwarded onto the serial 010. And it is now the responsibility of R2 here, which is, for instance, our ISP, to direct that to 192.168.2.0 here. So when we click on this, it is successful. So anywhere on this topology, we can now ping. All right, vice versa. Okay, so from PC2 to PC3. All right, so from PC3 to PC2, okay, it's successful. From PC1 to PC3, and from PC3 to PC1. All right, so we're done. Again, when do we use the default static route? So we use the default static route considering that R1 and R3 here are the stub router. And also with the assumption that R2 here would be the ISP. In that scenario, that's where we use or usually use the default static route. So every time you connect to the ISP, okay, so one option to use is the default static route. Aside, of course, from BGP, if you have BGP in there. So for now, so we will be using the default static route. So every time you see, okay, an ISP on the topology, and you are configuring a route from your router or from your network going to the ISP, it should be a default static route. And then from the ISP, in this assumption from R2, going to our network, so we will be using the standard static route. Or you could apply some summarization, which is discussed on the next video lecture or video demo. All right, so for now, so we are done with this demonstration. See you on the next video demo. Thank you very much for watching and listening. Have a great day.